Come on. Install. Install. Yes! That's amazing for a game from 1997. I wonder why it was so easy.
We think the PC really is the entertainment platform for the future.
Ah, that explains it. Get off my lawn! While the titanic clash between Westwood and Blizzard defined the popularization of the RTS in the mid-90s, it was a small studio lurking in the background of this fracas that would release some of the genre's best titles. Ensemble was shockingly formed by the CEO of Ensemble Corporation, Tony Goodman. He had spent the past few years building his consultancy firm in Texas, not exactly a gaming CV. Alongside his brother Rick and John Boog Scott, Goodman decided to hire Bruce Shelley, the co-designer of the excellent Civilization and Railroad Tycoon. Together the team created a project called Dawn of Man, which took the best elements of both turn-based and real-time strategy games, and merged them together with a historical backdrop for flavour. The result played more like an RTS, but owes as much of a debt to Shelley's Civilization as it does to the likes of Dune 2. And over the course of the next year, the team proceeded to refine the game into a more accessible experience in Command & Conquer, hoping that the setting, easier AI, and detailed tutorial would bring in the casual crowd that weren't sold on war games. The end product was also their first game, eventually retitled Age of Empires. It was unleashed in 1997 and became the best-selling new RTS title of that year, beating out the likes of Dark Reign and Total Annihilation. The timing was fortuitous, as releasing a real-time strategy in 1998 would have been a very bad idea. What did make the game more marketable in the end was the interest of a small publishing studio looking to dip their toe into the gaming waters. You may have heard of them actually. They're called Microsoft. With the backing of this tech giant and plenty of development time, the game was a hit, and Ensemble had already signed a contract with them for a sequel before they'd finished the first one, despite not knowing how it would fare. Now that's confidence. It's also one of the reasons why the original Age of Empires has been forgotten about until recently. A year after its release, people were cottoning on to the fact that Total Annihilation was far superior on a technical level, and as we all know, Blizzard unveiled StarCraft, which changed everything. Those are two very big names to battle against, and while there was a stopgap expansion at the end of the year that was received positively, it couldn't hope to compete with what Blizzard was doing at the time. Step forth the Age of Kings, the sequel to the first game, and the title that the original lives permanently in the shadow of, and with good reason. Another video for another time. They don't sell the original Age of Empires these days, so you'll have to acquire the original or gold edition at a car boot sale or through some other unknown method. After doing so, you really should install the inventively named U-Patch. U-Patch is the unofficial patch for the Rise of Rome and has more improvements and enhancements than you can shake a stick at. It's exactly the kind of community effort that all classic titles deserve and does its very best to bring the original game up to modern standards. Like I said in the beginning, I did manage to get the game running normally on Windows 10, as you can see from the footage of this level. Now compare the same mission but with U-Patch. Ah, there's that widescreen goodness, and the unit queuing of the expansion works by default too. Age of Empires features a lively CD soundtrack based on period instruments, and if you prefer MIDI, then the original will play well with whatever sound font you choose. This style of music fits the game like a glove, and at the time offered a further contrast from the frenetic, action-packed orchestral and rock soundtracks featured in other RTS titles. Nobody wants a sick guitar riff in the middle of a villager picking a berry bush. The menu consists of single player, multiplayer that won't work by default but can be fixed if that's your jam, a help function that opens a Windows browser, and a scenario builder to create your own maps. So obviously we're going to be focusing on that single player button. Choosing single player takes you to a sub-menu with the option to play a random map, a campaign, a death match, or a pre-generated scenario. You can also access your saved games here. So if you're a friendless loser like me, you still have potentially infinite content with the game's procedurally procedurally generated maps. We're going to be looking at the Egyptian campaign that teaches you the basics, but the gold edition of the game features plenty of fun with 10 campaigns to battle over, each subdivided into many maps of increasing difficulty and frustration. What's also notable is that you can choose that difficulty level, and also the player name, so multiple people can play at different levels and campaigns on the same machine. A neat feature if you shared the computer with two little brothers who were both much better than you. Not that I'd know anything about that, of course. That's all very well and good, but how does it play? Well, slower than your average RTS. There's a more sedate and contemplative approach that stems from the influence of turn-based games of the past, but their effect on the gameplay is minimal. You can crank up the speed to fastest and soon get the hang of things if you've played an RTS before, though some of the animations will look a little silly. Alternatively, if you're a fan of the Civilization series, you can slow it right down and spend 18 years on each campaign optimizing your best city layout. The levels of a tutorial campaign are sensibly laid out for the most part, and you're given both unvoiced explanations of what's going on and hints about how to play in the screen before the level starts, doing what all good tutorials should and treating you like a complete beginner. While this area of the game is laid out effectively, it lacks the showmanship of other titles that sported video and voice acting years prior. Villagers build stuff, repair stuff, and harvest resources, just like in any other RTS. You gather these resources from plants and animals in your vicinity, needing wood to construct basic buildings and meat to train units. Houses increase your population cap, and it's all very simple and easy to pick up. The pathfinding of the villagers can be a bit suspect, and they require a lot of babysitting, otherwise they'll stand about looking useless, like I do when I'm not making these videos. The choice of the team to have a zoomed in and isometric rather than top-down view of Age of Empires means that the increased resolution avoids the ant effect. I'm playing this at 720p, but 1080 is supported too. All the details you need are at the bottom and top of the screen, with a menu to adjust things or review level information. I breezed happily through the opening of the game until I came to a mission where you had to go through an enemy base in order to claim some kind of monolith. I went too fast, and soon found myself overpowered in my cockiness and losing. After taking a little more time and care with my build-up, I dealt with the opposition in a wild brawl. Gathering resources and moving units is fine at a faster speed, but combat can be all over the place and quite difficult to control. My units didn't auto-attack non-combatants, meaning if it was just buildings and villagers, they'd sit and do nothing, allowing the enemy to regroup. This was because what I'd considered my enemy was actually set to neutral in the diplomacy menu, meaning my guys would only attack after being attacked, and their default stance was live and let live, obligatory Wings reference. Once you have a certain number of buildings and the correct stockpile of resources, you can advance to the next age. The tool age is the first, which is appropriate given who they're being controlled by. This leads to more upgrades and buildings and units on a nice logical path as you steadily outpace the computer before wiping him off the map. The mechanic was used on a lesser scale in Warcraft 2 with Town Hall upgrades, but this has a much more dramatic effect on proceedings, changing how all your buildings look and unlocking a whole host of new things to play with. Stone and gold are introduced as additional resources, and things like trade and farming are provided as alternatives. One level gives you a choice between learning how to fish with boats or killing elephants and lions. I think you can guess which is easier to do. You'd expect a tutorial to be a handful of maps explaining the basics before moving on to the core game. The Ascent of Egypt campaign is a whopping 12 missions long, and for the most part it does the whole explaining thing just fine. It'll also give you a nice, burning hatred of the Canaanites, which is clearly a bonus. The base game has 36 missions, and with the expansion you're up to a respectable 55 in total. That's more than the games in the genre that came before it, but not quite as large as its contemporary competitors like Red Alert and Total Annihilation. By the time you reach the 11th mission, you're properly involved in the strategizing, with the computer attacking you and the objectives becoming increasingly difficult. If you survive the initial Canaanite onslaught, the next step is to go island hopping for resources, including an essential patch of stone which is ludicrously hidden behind a copse of trees on the far right of the map. Stop hiding things behind trees. Behold, the random Pyramid of Egypt! Now all that's left to do is kick the enemy's skulls in with our final campaign mission. Die, Canaanites, die! So it's running as smooth as butter and features a lovely campaign with many other options and stellar presentation to boot. What's wrong with it? It's not Age of Empires 2. The build queue is limited to one type and there's no defaulting troops to locations or actions. There's no formations and absolutely basic unit AI. The poor pathfinding and resultant handholding required for almost all units is a drag, and the unit sounds are very dated when big battles repeat the noise 50 times over. There's only so much tinkering everything the unofficial patch can do before it runs up against issues that just can't be fixed. It's a shame that Age of Empires never got the re-envisaged treatment it deserved, so reluctantly I have to play the entire 5-hour campaign again in the remastered version!
Your mission is a failure.
The result? Actually, it ran pretty smoothly. Everything has been given a lick of paint without disrupting the ideas of the original too much, and almost all the modern RTS conventions have been added to round off the jagged edges. My initial attempt at playing through the release was a buggy affair with terrible performance, but subsequent patches from the developer appears to have fixed that, for me at least. Based on the mixed reviews, it might not be the case for your machine, so tread carefully. So while the enhanced community version of this game can't drag it away from its flaws, the remaster improves matters enough to recommend it, even if it's a game that will forever be a fun historical curiosity and a clear stepping stone on the way to Age of Empires 2. Ensemble were unsurprisingly acquired by Microsoft in 2001 and continued making quality RTS titles like Galactic Battlegrounds and Age of Mythology until 2009, when they were inexplicably closed down. A spin-off studio by Rick Goodman was formed in 1998 and released Empire Earth, an excellent continuation of the ideas present in the original Age of Empires title. I'll probably review it in 2021 if I'm still about. If you want to play a historical RTS, then I advise you to pick up Age of Empires 2 HD Edition, which features 31 missions in the base game and 100 additional DLC missions developed over the last 17 years. No RTS comes close to that level of quality and content. Okay, one RTS matches it. Happy? There's also the likes of Age of Empires 3, which is more of the same but with a different setting and not quite reaching the same heights. Your other option is Rise of Nation, which takes even more influence from turn-based strategy than the former. For those of you who want something a bit more modern, Zero AD is a free RTS that began its life as a total conversion project for Age of Empires 2. It has been in alpha for 17 years now and is mostly skirmish and multiplayer based. With a recent spate of remasters and expansions over the past few years, and the announcement from Microsoft that there will be a 4th Age of Empires game at some point, it's pretty clear to see just how much of an impact Ensemble Studios' second Voyage had on the genre. It's a shame their maiden one, while playable and enjoyable to a degree, is in such bad shape when compared to its successor, though you'll be in even worse shape if you don't get off my lawn!